Are youth involved in the service? Let's do this every week, so y'all get used to it, okay? Yeah. We had a few other who were supposed to be here. We had them planned, but it's okay. We're going to talk about it. I'm going to have Eli come up in just a minute. Okay, hold on 1 second, and he's going to read the passage we're reading this morning. But I love having our youth involved. I just want y'all to know that we appreciate the youth, and any of the adults here, please shake a hand with the youth, give them a hug. I know Tyson loves hugs. Where's Tyson at? Don't hug Tyson. He probably will run away from him.
I keep throwing you in the pocket.
Shake one of the youth's hands, just tell them how much we appreciate them. This is Youth Week, so we're going to try to incorporate them as much as possible. We've been working on some of this stuff for the past few weeks. But this morning, I'm going to be in the book of James. We've been going through James, actually with the youth group on Sunday nights. So as y'all been going through the Bible and hitting a lot of deep theological stuff on Sunday nights up here in the sanctuary. So far this year, we've been in the book of James. So James 5 is where we're going to be at this morning. And James, probably a lot of y'all know, it's just compiled and compacted with so much. For it only being 5 chapters long, I feel like it's one of the most convicting and just very practical books in the whole Bible. It's very, very filled with so much stuff. A lot of practical stuff, a lot of convicting things as well. So we're only going like a few verses at a time, it seems like, on Sunday night. So I'm going to be towards the end of the book. This message this morning is going to come from James 5, verses 1 through 11. But again, just pray for our youth as well. Before I get too far into the message this morning, be praying for our youth, knowing that we're doing a lot of things. Trying to do at least a couple of activities every month. Miss Karen and Janice, they were able to go with us last time we did something. Did y'all have fun? All right, so yeah, it was a lot of fun, right? So any of you adults who'd like to get involved with our youth as well, just let me know, and we'll get y'all at these chaperones on one of our little trips. But let me go ahead and get Eli up here. He's going to read James 5, verses 1 through 6.
Amen. Go to now, ye rich men, weep, and howl for your miseries that shall come upon you. Your riches are corrupted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver is tangled, and your worst of them shall be a witness against you, and shall eat your flesh as it were fire. Ye have heaped treasure together for the last days. Behold, the hire of the laborers who have beat down your field, which is of you kept back your fire, and the price of them which have reaped are entered into the years of the Lord of Sabbath. Ye have lived your flesh on the earth, and be then wanted ye have known your hearts as in a clay of slaughter. Ye have condemned them till be just and keep, though not be hasty.
Thanks, Eli. That's it. Thanks, buddy. We want to pray for us. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for your word and for the reading of your word, Lord. I pray that you'll just give me the words to teach and to preach this morning, God, that I don't teach anything that's of myself, but only what's coming from your word, Lord. I pray that you'll just protect me behind this pulpit. And Lord, I pray that you'll be with my words and be with our hearts and the message this morning. And I pray that you'll just be most glorified in all things. And again, I pray in Jesus' name. Amen. So a lot of y'all probably know, too, that James is a book about faith. We see a lot of faith without works is dead. And we get that from here. We learn a lot about, because of our faith, we're going to act a certain way. We're not going to do certain things. Because of our faith, we're not going to be, saying certain type of words, listening to certain type of music, those type things. And we see a lot of that in James. Because we have faith, we're going to be acting and doing certain things a certain way. So it's a very convicting book, full of a whole lot of theology, but also just a lot of practical things. And so we've had a lot of good discussions on Sunday nights looking through the book of James. But a couple of things we see is, what does faith look like? How do we display it for others to see? We know that faith without works is dead. And we control our tongue. The things that we say, we won't really glorify God. We don't want to be using curse words or trying to curse somebody or say bad things about somebody. We want to be able to control our tongue. And also there's a lot in here about taking care of the poor as well. So it's a great book. If you ever just need a light book to read, James is a really good one, but you're probably going to be convicted coming back out of it. Or at least I do. And I see that so far this year, I've really been in love with the book of James. Yeah, so here we're at the last part of James. We're in James 5, and we're going to see different pictures of faith and how we persevere in our faith. So we want to endure even in hard times, when it's hard to have faith, or when we're in difficult circumstances, that we continue in our faith, whether it's easy and when it's in a difficult season as well. So James 1 through 6 is really going to be the start of the lesson this morning. But then I'm also going to get into the next few verses, verses 7 through 11. But the main idea is that until Jesus returns, patience in suffering is the faith that works. So we all know that Jesus is going to return. We're going to look at some passages here in just a few seconds about that as well. But we know that Jesus will return, so we know that. And so because of that, in light of that, we need to have patience in suffering, and that is faith that works. So we're going to see 3 pictures of patience that encourages us as well. But anytime we're going into a new book or a new lesson or a series, I want to first back up and talk about who is James, who is he writing to, why do we even need to be looking at this book? So what's going on here? So the cultural context of this is that James is writing a letter to a bunch of believers, or if they are Christians, who is his audience here. And they're actually very poor, and they work all day for a little bit of money, and this is really his audience. It's not usually the very wealthy. But because his audience is very poor, he does have a lot to talk about the wealthy. And so when Eli was just reading, he was talking about really what the future is going to hold for the very wealthy who are very simple at the same time. Because it's not a sin to be wealthy or to make good money, but it's what you do with that money that kind of determines where your heart is. And so we see that there's a lot of wealthy people who are very sinful with how they manage their money. So James' audience, like I said, they're very poor. When Sarah Ann and I went into Peru, we saw a little bit of a picture that was very similar to this. So in Peru, in Lima, you probably get the picture. A lot of people know that they have these slums, what they call it. Basically, people are living on top of each other, basically. They basically just put different pieces of tin. There's really no privacy. It's just like sheets of metal on top of sheets of metal, and then maybe there's some tarp. There's hardly really any security. There's no locks. There's rarely any doors. And I couldn't see a very good picture of this when we went last time because it was dark. But if you see it in the light, it's just like thousands and thousands of these things on top of each other. And so it's just like thousands of people living on top of each other. There's no privacy. Like I'm saying, it's just very, very poor and impoverished. And a lot of those people are also going out and working in the fields. And so there'd be some very wealthy people in Peru, but there'd also be the majority of the people very, very, very poor. And so even compared to America, we have a middle class, we do have a poor class and upper class, and we call it the 1%, very, very wealthy. But it's even more distinguished back in these days, kind of like it is in Peru, where it's only like a couple of families own like all the land, but then everybody else, all these Christians and everybody else who's a commoner, are working every day for their paycheck. You talk about getting paid once a week or twice a month, like they got paid like every day. If they didn't get paid, then they really didn't even get a meal in. So that's kind of the context of what's going on here. You have these rich people, they're very corrupt, and they're not even paying these Christians who are going out and working as their laborers. They're not even paying them sometimes. So James is addressing this issue in his day to his church family there is struggling with this. They're working hard all day, and they're trying to be good followers, but then at the same time, they don't even have enough to survive and to eat each day. So I'm going to kind of go back, and we're going to look at these verses that Eli had just read, kind of one by one. So chapter 5, verse 1 says, "Go to now, ye rich men, weep and howl for your miseries that shall come upon you." So to start with, the rest of the book, James is considering his audience as brothers or sisters, brothers in Christ. He's called them brothers. But here he's just saying, ye rich men. So these aren't really the people who he's writing to, but he's talking about the very wealthy. He's saying that they will weep and howl for their misery. So Jesus, of course, is going to return, but he's going to be a judge over these sinful people. One day, their wealth is going to not last. It's just going to last while they're here on earth. It's not going to last during eternity. Right. So you rich men, weep and howl for your miseries that shall come upon you, because they will be judged. Your riches are corrupted, and your garments are moth-eaten. So their riches, of course, they are very wealthy at this time, but it is very corrupt, and it's moth-eaten, meaning they're not going to last. Your gold and silver is cankered, and the rust of them shall be a witness against you. So even their gold and their silver is not going to last. Ye have heaped treasure for yourself for the last days. So basically the treasure they've got for themselves in eternity is really nothing. They didn't build up for themselves treasures in heaven. They just built up treasures for here on earth. And then verse 4, "Behold, the hire of the laborers who have reaped down your fields, which is of you kept back by pride, they cry. So basically, the people who they're hiring to do the work on their land, their souls are crying. They're crying out for a righteous judgment to come upon them, because they're not even paying them for the work that they're doing. And the cries of them which have reaped are entered into the ears of the Lord of the Sabbath. And then verse 5. Ye have lived in pleasure on the earth, and have been wanton. Ye have nourished your hearts as in a day of slaughter. Ye have condemned and killed the just, and he doth not resist you. So ye have condemned and killed the just. They're basically becoming murderers. They're not even paying these people for the work that they're doing so they can even survive to go buy their food and water. So there's several things that we see about these unbelievers, these very wealthy unbelievers here. One is that they're being judged for hoarding their wealth. So in the first couple verses, we see that they're just basically just storing up a big, almost like a big savings account. They're just building up all their wealth into one big storage, and it's not going to last. It's basically they're going to tear down their old barns and build up bigger barns just to store up treasures for themselves here on earth. But all that's going to rot. None of that's going to last. Secondly, the second accusation against these unbelieving wealthy people is that the wealthy will be judged, and their treasures on earth would bring about their torment in eternity. So Jesus tells a parable in Luke 12. We'll flip over there for just a second. Jesus also has some stuff to say about people who are building up treasures for themselves here on earth and not building up treasures in heaven. So in Luke 12, verses 13 to 21, it says this. And one of the company said unto him, unto Jesus, Master, speak to my brother that he divide the inheritance with me. And he said unto him, Man, who made me judge or divider over you? And he said unto them, Take heed and beware of covetousness. For a man's life consisteth not in the abundance of the things which he possesseth. And he spake a parable unto him. So basically, this man has come to him and said, Jesus, tell my brother to share our inheritance with me. And Jesus is saying that he's not worried about these treasures here on earth. So going into verse 16 of chapter 12, saying unto them, the ground of a certain rich man brought forth plentifully. So basically, in this parable, this man brought forth a whole great crop. He's very, very wealthy in the fruit of his land. And he thought within himself, saying, What shall I do? Because I have no room where to bestow my fruits. He said, This will I do. I will pull down my barns and build greater, and there will I bestow all my fruits and my goods. So he basically has so much food, so much fruit from his crops. He's saying, I don't have enough place to store all this. I'm just going to tear down all my old barns and build bigger barns to store everything. Verse 19. And I will say to my soul, Soul, thou hast much goods laid up for many years. Take thine ease, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said unto him, Thou fool, this night thy shalt be required of thee. Then whose shall those things be, which thou hast provided? So is he that layeth up treasure for himself, and is not rich toward God. So basically, in this parable, this man has just laid up riches for himself. Almost think of it as he has a really big savings account. You ever know people just want to save and save and save? They never actually use it. They never, incorporate it into the church or give to the poor. They're not obedient with it. They just want to save and save and save. And this man's saving all his wealth. And there's nothing, he can't take any of it with him when he dies. So he's not building up treasure for himself in eternity. He's not giving to the poor, not tithing and being an obedient tither to the church, or helping people go on mission trips, doing fruitful things with his wealth. But he's just saving it up for himself. But then in the end, he gets to say to himself, to his own soul, take ease, eat, drink, and be merry. But really, he's not building up for himself any kind of treasure in heaven. And so that's kind of Jesus' view of what, when it comes to money. It's okay to have wealth. God blesses people with great wealth, but he wants for it to be used for his glory. And so these people here, it's not the fact that they are rich, but it's because of their sinful heart. They're not being obedient with it. They're not paying their own laborers. And the church, basically, the Christians at this time are doing the work, and that they weren't getting paid for it. Thirdly, the third accusation against the unbelieving is that the wealthy will be judged for cheating their workers. So in verse 4 and 6, we see that their wealth was accumulating, and the poor were dying because they weren't paying them. And then the fourth accusation, the last one against these unbelieving wealthy people, is that the wealthy will be judged for self-indulgence. Basically, they're like cattle gorging for food. They're just constantly eating until the slaughter. So they save up for no lasting purpose. They're not building up for themselves any sort of treasures in heaven. So God help us in our materialistic culture. Here in America, I know we struggle with it a lot. It can be easy to be very materialistic and to want things. So God help us in this culture and to see this warning that may we not be like cows, just enjoying food and just eating and eating and eating, or just saving and saving and just making money an idol. See, it's not the money that's the root of evil. It's the love of money that's the root of evil. So we don't want to be unaware that we are about to be judged. Even in Sodom and Gomorrah, back in Ezekiel, it said that they had pride, they had plenty of food, they had a lot of great wealth, they were very comfortable, but they didn't take care of the needy, they didn't take care of the poor, and they also weren't glorifying God in any way. They were overfed, they were unconcerned about God. So ultimately, with the wealthy here in these first 6 verses here, they are condemning their workers to death by not paying them. So their oppression would lead to their judgment and to their damnation. So God is certainly serious about his people not hoarding their wealth and not cheating their workers and not living in luxury and self-indulgence and also not holding back from the poor and in effect letting them die. So we see a whole lot in James, especially the first couple chapters of the book, how we treat the very wealthy and the poor. So basically, also in this context, in the book of James, earlier in the book, they were basically letting the wealthy come in and sit in the front rows, take care of them basically in the church. But then the poor people who wanted to come into their church, they wouldn't even let them in the door. And so James had a big discussion about them earlier in the book about how to treat the wealthy and the poor is the same. We're just all people whom God loves. He died on the cross for the sins of the whole world. So now we go into the last couple verses of this morning's message. How we just looked at how Jesus is going to come back, certainly, but that's how he's going to come back as the judge over the sinful. Now we're going to look at how he's going to return as a deliverer of the faithful. And I gave a couple of sheets out to Evan and Cameron. Y'all got one? Who did I get the other one to? Tori? Y'all go up and read the verses I wrote on your sheets. There you come, read just a few little verses. So basically the verses they're about to read are going to show different parts of the New Testament, how it's certain that Jesus will return. Jesus is definitely going to be coming back.
Amen.
Go ahead, Evan. Just step up here.
Matthew 24:36. But concerning that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father only.
Hebrews 9:28 says, So Christ, having been offered once to bear the sins of many, will appear a second time, not to deal with sin, but to save those who are eagerly waiting for him.
Matthew 25:13. Watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour.
Amen.
That's just a few verses. Actually, if you Google it, you can get over 100 of them. So I just kind of found the main ones that we recognize in Scripture about Jesus returning. So it's not if he's going to return, but when he returns. So we've already seen the first 6 verses that he's going to come as a judge for the sinful. But now we're going to see about when he returns, he's going to be a deliverer to the faithful, to the church. So we're going to see how he's going to be a deliverer to the faithful. So just try to imagine for yourself, try to put yourself in the shoes of some of these Christians here that James is speaking to. You're working 6 days of the week. You're keeping your Sabbath day. They're here in church on this day. But they're hearing somebody read, this letter here that James is writing to them, because a lot of them couldn't read. And so just imagine that you're working hard, and not every day you're even getting paid for the work that you're doing. And so there's a lot of persecution going on with these Christians, and the fact that a lot of them are dying and struggling to survive. They're not even getting paid for the work they're doing in the first place. But they know that God's going to return, that Jesus is going to return. He's going to be a judge for the sinful, but he's also going to deliver them because they're being faithful, even when it's very hard. So because we have the faith that James talks about here in the book of James, we have faith that acts and that works and does good things, but also want faith that's going to persevere even when it's hard. So here in James, I'm going to start reading in verse 7 here in just a second. But we're going to see how he says to be patient right now until he returns. So in verse 7 of James 5 through 11, it says this. Be patient, therefore, brethren. So remember, he didn't call these rich people brethren. He called them you rich men. But now he's going back and calling them brethren here in verse 7. Be patient, therefore, brethren, unto the coming of the Lord. Behold, the husbandman waiteth for the precious fruit of the earth, and hath long patience for it, until he receive the early and latter rain. Be ye also patient, establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord draweth nigh. Judge not one against another, brethren, lest ye be condemned. Behold, the judge standeth before the door. Take, my brethren, the prophets who have spoken in the name of the Lord, for an example of suffering, affliction, and of patience. Behold, we count them happy which endure. Ye have heard of the patience of Job, and have seen the end of the Lord. And the Lord is very pitiful and of tender mercy. So we're going to look at three pictures here of patience. So the first one is be patient like a farmer. Be patient like a farmer waiting for the harvest. So who here grew up on a farm or is currently trying to grow a garden? I try to grow a garden. So one thing I'm learning with growing a garden is how much patience it takes. My dad's over here smiling. He knows that when I get in my head and I want to plant some seeds, I plant seeds whether it's ready or not. So the first time I did it was, I guess you call it before Easter, and of course there was a frost that killed it. I've learned that you got to wait till after Easter to plant your crop, because there's always going to be a frost before then. But when it comes to being a farmer, you got to be very patient. You can't control the weather, you can't control the frost, or whether it's going to start raining, or bring it too much rain. Last year I planted a garden, and we got too much rain in May last year, and it just drowned, it just rotted. So I got frustrated and didn't keep going. But you got to have patience as a farmer, or you're not going to cut it. It's not going to be fun. So be patient like a farmer waiting for the harvest. So of course back then they were a very agricultural society. They had to grow their crops or whatever they were eating. They couldn't just all go to the market and buy what they wanted. So they had to depend on God's provision. And we still have to depend on God's provision, but we're just not always in that farming setting nowadays. Now we just kind of do it as a hobby. So if your garden doesn't go well, you still go to the grocery store and buy your food. But back then, if their garden didn't do good, they had to keep trying to get the food for themselves. So sometimes when it rains, I'm thinking, oh, this is so annoying. Like with me, what I do, we do erosion control work. So when it's muddy, I got a lot of site managers on these sites like, hey, there's mud in the streets, it's going into the woods, going to these retention ponds. Y'all got to come out here and get it straightened out. So I'm over here thinking, oh God, please make it stop raining. But I can just think there's probably some farmer down the road who's just begging and praying for rain. So I'm like, I don't want to go against those prayers, There's probably somebody really needing and praying for rain. And I also think of that too when it snows. I think there's some kid at home just begging for it to snow or snow down. So I don't want to say, oh God, stop snowing. I know there's some little kid wanting to get out of school. But it does take patience as a farmer. When we're having that kind of patience, we're having to wait and trust in God to take care of us. So when you're being patient like a farmer, you have faith that trust in God, because we can't control everything. Especially when it comes to weather. We can't control when it's going to rain, when it's going to stop, when it's going to quit freezing, all these type things. So a farmer has to trust in God with things that they cannot control. A farmer cannot control when it will rain or when it will not. So James says that when it comes to the Lord's returning and the injustice that they're dealing with, we need to trust God like a farmer trusts things we can't control. A couple other things that I think of that we can't control are like different circumstances that they just happen to us. Maybe at work or maybe with family. Not everything's planned or guaranteed. So there's a lot of things we can't control that we just have to learn to trust in God and be like a patient farmer. Especially when things come with life and death, and with sickness, or with the economy, whatever it is that we can't control, we can think of how a farmer has patience over the weather. He just has to wait and be praying, but it takes patience to depend on God with things that we can't control. But there are things that the farmer can control that we see in verse 7 and 8. So we can honor God with what he can control. We obviously cannot control the weather, but we can control. We can't honor God with the things that we can control. So in verse 9 here, it says, grudge not one against another, brethren. So when it comes to being grudging against somebody, or especially in a church setting like it is here, or talking bad about people, we can't control that. There's different temptations that we struggle with that we can control, or making God the center of our home. We can control that, and praying and reading our Bible, being obedient. We can't control these type things like a farmer can. But there's some things we can't control. We recognize that, and God recognizes that as well. So the first thing is to be patient like a farmer. Trust God in things we cannot control, but then honor God with the things that we can control. Next, we need to be patient like a prophet, speaking the truth. So in verse 10, we see, take, my brethren, the prophets, who have spoken in the name of the Lord for an example of suffering, affliction, and of patience. So maybe some people here know, maybe not everybody, but all these those prophets in the Old Testament, you know, they had a lot of the books were named after me, like Ezekiel, Jeremiah, Isaiah. You know, these guys, you may think that they were famous, and they were, but they were also, a lot of them were persecuted to death, like by their own people, by the Israelites. They hated them for the things that they were saying, but they had to say those things back in the Old Testament because God wanted them to say those things. But they were hated and greatly persecuted by their own people, by the Israelites, and they were hated by them. So we need to be patient like a prophet, speaking truth even when people don't want to hear the truth. So like a farmer, you know, patience does mean, like a farmer, we don't need to be patient and just like kick back and relax. You know, a farmer can still go do other things while he's waiting for the rain. But very similar to that, a prophet also doesn't need to just sit back and just relax. We can still be out there sharing the good news of the gospel while we're waiting for Jesus to return. And doing good things and doing good works like James talks about here in his letter. So a prophet undergoes persecution and speaks boldly against injustice. No matter the circumstances around us, we can always speak about the goodness, the greatness, the judgment, and the mercy of God. And then the last picture here is be patient like Job, here in verse 11. Y'all remember the book of Job back in the Old Testament? Verse 11 says, "Behold, we count them happy which endure. Ye have heard of the patience of Job, and have seen the end of the Lord. And the Lord is very pitiful and of tender mercy." So, if you don't know the story of Job, Job basically had everything taken away from him. He was very prosperous and very wealthy, but he glorified God in it, though. But then there was a Satan who basically took away everything that Job had been blessed with to see if he would still praise God and still glorify God. And Job, even though it was very difficult, he did still praise God and he was still glorifying Him. But Job is a very big book. It's 42 chapters, and it's mostly just a dialogue between him and some of his other friends. And so, in all the different suffering, the things that he was going through, which is very difficult, I couldn't imagine going through anything that he went through. But in all the things that he went through, he was still trying to glorify God, and he knew that he didn't do anything bad to deserve the things that were happening to him. So we can still have patience, even like the patience of Job. And we know that God is, of course, full of mercy and very compassionate, like we see at the end of verse 11 here. Basically, the rest of the book of James, just very quickly, it goes into verse 12, talking about our speech and having a very trustworthy speech, and then being prayerful throughout the rest of it, and then verses 13 through 18. And then I'm just going to read the last couple verses here in James, and then we'll close, where it says in verse 19, "Brethren, if any of you do err from the truth and one convert him, let him know that he which converted the sinner from the error of his way shall save a soul from death and shall hide a multitude of sins." And so we're seeing these brothers again, this brethren. James is talking to other church members here at this church. How, as a church, you keep each other accountable. And like if another brother or sister falls into sin, we can help each other and help each other to come out of that. That's one great thing about the local church that I love so much, is that we're seeing each other often. We catch up with each other every week. I know it's very easy to say, "Hey, how's it going?" And you say you're doing good, but when we're around each other more often, we get involved in each other's lives. We can help each other with the sins that we struggle with and the different temptations that come our way. So, just as a closing, James does close the book very, very well with just a happy note, just saying, if you help a brother or sister overcome a sin, like from the error of his way, you should just save their soul from death and shall hide a multitude of sins. And so I love the book of James. It's only 5 chapters. You can read it this afternoon and just really enjoy it. But just know from a couple things as a summary of this sermon this morning. Know that Jesus is returning without a doubt. The Scripture is very clear, Old Testament, all the way to the New Testament, all the way to the end, that Jesus will return. He's going to return as a judge to some people, to the sinful, especially to some of these wealthy people he talks about here in the book of James, who were very disobedient with their money. But also he will return as a deliverer to the church. And for us, because we have our hope and we put our faith in him, we can trust in him, whether it's easy or whether it's hard. No matter what, he's going to return. And we want him to return as a deliverer for ourselves. Tim, where'd you go? Yeah, we'll just do one song. One song. We're going to pray for us. We'll do a very short invitation. If you want to come up, pray, or if you want to talk to me, that's fine. We'll do a short invitation, and then we'll close again in prayer. Let me go and pray for us. Dear Heavenly Father, God, we thank you so much for this opportunity to worship you this morning, open up your word. And we just thank you for the message here in the book of James. And we just praise you for everything you're doing in our lives, Lord. I pray that you be with all the different things that people brought in with them this morning, God. I pray that you would take away anything that maybe holds somebody down or be a burden to them. I pray that you'll just relieve them of that, Lord. And we just thank you and praise you for all things. And we just glorify you for everything you're doing here at this church. And I'll say praise in Jesus' name. Amen.